Good afternoon to you. Mark Sutton of HurricaneTrack.com here. It is Saturday, the 14th of August, 2021, and we have a lot going on out there. We have Fred, which has degenerated into a tropical wave. It is incorrectly being referred to as dead. Dead Fred. I know that sounds cute and all, but it's not dead. It's not gone. The energy is still down there. It's a little bit confusing, and I'm going to show you how that is and actually some interesting stuff about it. But no, Fred is not gone. It's not dead. It's merely in a coma, if you will. But that's not even accurate. It has degenerated into a tropical wave again. Sometimes this happens. These systems come along. They encounter negative conditions, and they open up back into a sharp trough axis, as we call it. And it is no longer considered a tropical cyclone, which you have to have wind in all quadrants, all 360 degrees. And Fred currently lacks that. We'll talk about it. I'll show you. I will explain it to you. Then we have Grace, newly upgraded Grace from a depression to tropical storm Grace today. And this one could be a problem, starting first for the islands of the Caribbean and then maybe, just maybe, South Florida later in the week. A lot of what has to do with how Grace ends up will be what Fred does, believe it or not. It's all complicated, so let's get to it this busy, busy Saturday here in mid-August. First, in the eastern Pacific, we don't want to ignore Category 4 Hurricane Linda. This will generate some swells now that it has become so strong, and it'll send that wave energy out towards the Baja, maybe Southern California. We'll see about that. I'll start looking that up in the next couple of days. Maybe by Monday we'll get a better idea of that. I know some surfers out there would appreciate that, along the Southern Cal coastline, and maybe even Cabo and points north along the Baja Peninsula. Then we have the remnants of Fred down here. Again, that has opened up into a tropical wave again, and a very curious setup. I'll show you that in just a minute. And then now here is Grace approaching the islands, a tropical storm currently strengthening, and this is going to bring problems to our friends down here, and we're going to have to be looking at the cams that we've got down there from Brent and Timothy and Carlos across the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. We'll be able to track all of these things. All right, let's zoom back out. I was looking at that earlier. Let's go back this way. Here we go. There's Linda in the eastern Pacific, Cat 4, and it's moving away from land, so that's good news. But again, the swells that will come out eventually will make their way along the coast up here and could reach Southern California. Could be interesting days ahead for you surfers out there. If Fred can manage to come back, and assuming that this is where the center is from the advisory package from this morning, the 11 a.m. advisory package when it became the remnants of Fred, assuming that's where it is and it regenerates later from being degenerated, it redevelops later tomorrow maybe, it could reach the area near, and look at this, it has shifted west towards Alabama, Gulf Shores area. Isn't that interesting? Maybe coming in at a 50-mile-per-hour tropical storm, and that'll cause some problems over here along the coastline, onshore flow, some storm surge, high waves, you name it. At least it's not, hopefully, going to be a major event, but impactful nonetheless. And then the remnants of that are going to move inland over the deep south there with heavy rain and maybe even some severe weather up into the southeast. So we'll have a lot to focus on, including Grace over here. As of the 11 a.m. Eastern Time advisory, 45-mile-per-hour wind. A little bit stronger, it says. The advisory package, that is, moving across. Now, look, this is going to be really, really important, and I know this sounds like, Mark from Captain Obvious, whatever, saying this to you, but if it moves over all of these big islands here, relatively speaking, certainly Hispaniola, it's going to be a lot different for what happens next than if it just happens to skirt to the north. I mean, even a trek over Puerto Rico and then moving to the north of Hispaniola would have a much different potential outcome over here. Land interaction is a big deal. And I know that sounds obvious, but it's really going to matter here because, bring me back on for a sec, this is a small cyclone. It's a small system. It's not one of these larger ones, and these small systems can really ramp up fast. The global models don't see them as well as the hurricane models do, the HWRF, the HMON. They kind of fall in between the cracks a little bit. That's an oversimplification of it. the global models, they're just not high resolution enough to capture that small thunderstorm activity in the core of these smaller tropical cyclones. The hurricane-specific models are better suited for that. That might be why the H-WRF has been showing Grace becoming quite an intense system, relatively speaking, moving across and towards Florida. We'll see. So land interaction is going to be a really big key to this whole thing, but also, as this moves across, it's going to move into areas that were impacted recently by Fred. So more heavy rain for portions of the Lesser Antilles over here, and then again for Puerto Rico. And there is elevation down here, so I'm going to ring the bell again about rainfall being a big hazard. Some flooding rain coming potentially, and then if this slides over and tracks across Hispaniola, that could be problematic as well. And you know what? With the earthquake that happened today down here in Haiti, I mean, best case scenario is this goes up way to the north and doesn't rain at all down here, because very heavy rain, and I don't think it'll happen because it's well outside the cone of uncertainty, but if it were to track to the south and bring Haiti, the Haitian peninsula, a lot of heavy rainfall, that could be pretty bad considering the earthquake that just took place this morning. So again, lots of stuff to keep track of, and not just weather related. So there you go. All right, so here's one of the things I want to show you. Now, often I show the Vorticity Maps here from the University of Wisconsin, and I use this as a big clue as to the structure of our systems that we track, especially in the tropics. I typically like to use the 850 millibar layer of the atmosphere. And before I start, let's just make sure everybody understands, you do know, hopefully, that the atmosphere is made up of different layers. And we look at that in terms of pressure, sometimes in feet or meters or whatever, but usually it's pressure fields. 950 millibars, 925, 850, 700, 500, 200, 350, 8, whatever. I mean, that's how meteorologists talk. Geographers and geologists have their own language, doctors do. Same thing with meteorological sciences. The atmosphere is layered, like Shrek and Donkey talked about in the famous movie Like an Onion. And it's true. So at the lower level, closest to the ground, we have in this field here, let's get a color that'll pop out here, white, 925 millibars, not that far off the ground. All right? So what is that, about 2,000 feet or so, something like that, if I remember correctly. This is the vorticity signature at the low levels, about as low as you can get on these charts. So only a couple thousand feet above the ground. That is what Fred looks like. We'll look at Grace, and you can see Linda over here, but let's just focus on Fred. That is Fred at the lowest level of the atmosphere, as close to the surface as this product will allow, I do believe. So let's move up to the 5,000 foot level and see where that vorticity is. So there's 925, there's 850, and let's move up again to 700 millibars. Oh, wait a minute, what happened? Is that an old map? No. Look how things change. That vorticity is tilted or oriented more to the south and east. We go up to 500 millibars, which is about midway up roughly, 18 to 20,000 feet or so, and the vorticity, the mid-level of the atmosphere, is definitely over central Cuba and even south of there. So just comparing the two, there's 500 millibar vorticity versus 925 millibar vorticity. Which one of these is going to take over? That is going to be huge in terms of how this ends up and where it goes, how strong it could be, so forth and so on. Really interesting to see that. I've never done this before where I showed all these different layers, because I'm a pretty big fan of this layer right here, 850. Typically, if it looks good at 850, like Linda over here, it's pretty stacked. And then just for comparison, let's look at Grace over here at 925, and I'll circle this for you to focus your attention there. Grace at 925, 850, 700, it's a little tilted to the south somewhat, and then at 500, pretty well organized overall. Most of the vorticity signatures are aligned with Grace, so that's important. Interesting, isn't it? Hopefully. All right, so what else? Satellite, that's right. So the low-level vorticity that we're seeing there that I was showing you, that's right in there. And you can see the spin. I mean, it's pretty it's kind of a stretch to say that that's even a tropical wave. There's certainly some energy in here. But what is all of this going on down here? Lots of lightning with it. That's been there for at least the last 36 hours or so. And as I just showed you, in the 500 millibar vorticity, there is energy down there. And that is reflected in the vorticity field and in reality. Well, I mean, they're both reality, but the cloud shot, the animation. So really, which one of these is going to take over? That is a huge question mark. So I'll draw one for you. And I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. We'll show you what the GFS thinks. It doesn't think, but you know what I'm saying, what it shows towards the end of today's update. Meanwhile, over to the east, here's Grace, much more vertically aligned. That's a good way to put it. Good turning associated with it. Some banding in there, but it's a small system, so any core that it's trying to develop is sitting right in here probably. And until it gets close enough to San Juan radar to really see it, and Recon gets out there, I think they're going out there later today. Most of this is just based on satellite, but again, back at the vorticity fields, it's lined up pretty well, so the satellite kind of confirms that. Pretty good lightning earlier today. All of this headed towards these islands over here. Get ready. More gusty winds, heavy rain, maybe a few strong thunderstorms in the bands of this system. And with it strengthening, I mention this often, with it strengthening as it goes over, the effects could be more pronounced because a system that is on the increase typically has more punch to it than those that are steady state, and certainly a difference between those that are weakening. All right, a couple things to note in terms of future intensification. Grace has plenty of atmospheric and oceanic fuel to work with. Fred, the same kind of thing up through here. No lack of upper ocean heat content. I mean, it's getting towards mid-August, so that's not going to be an issue for these systems. The main inhibitors are going to be dry mid-level air, the relative humidity of that part of the atmosphere, again at about the 700 millibar level of the atmosphere, somewhere around there. That makes a big difference. If it's not as moist, let's say about 70% humidity values, then these systems tend to struggle. It's kind of like taking a hairdryer on a steamed up mirror and you dry it out. So warmer, drier mid-level air kind of creates this cap, and you don't get a decent amount of thunderstorm or convective activity. That might be lacking a little bit still because we're about a week away from the climatological ramping up. In other words, the Atlantic has a little bit more work to do before it becomes fully favorable. So if this is what it looks like, not quite there yet, imagine what we're going to be looking at in just a couple of weeks. And then the other thing, of course, is wind shear, the change of wind direction and or speed throughout those different layers of the atmosphere that I was telling you about. If you have the low-level winds going this way, maybe this is the tropical system, and mid to upper-level winds are going this way, and they cross each other, it's like scissors. They shear, and it tears those thunderstorms apart, and then that vortex gets tilted, and the system can't stay as healthy. So those are the things we'll watch, especially since we know upper ocean heat content is not lacking. In the Gulf of Mexico, speaking strictly about Fred here, making its way up through this area, very, very warm water, close to 31 degrees Celsius. So we're talking about mid to upper 80s Fahrenheit, lots and lots of warm water. One thing Fred will do, a benefit, once it passes, it'll churn this up, so there will be a little bit of a cold wake, which we'll see how long that lasts. So any subsequent hurricanes that might come along, if they are in the short term, would have a little bit of a cooler area to work with. Just like when a motorboat zooms on by, or a big cruise ship that leaves a wake, or an airplane does the same thing, especially jet aircraft in the atmosphere. When tropical cyclones move through, they leave a wake as well, and we'll see how much it churns up the water as Fred goes by. All right, looking at the GFS, specifically this afternoon. The Euro comes out later, so we're going to look at the GFS right now off of Tropical Tidbits. This is the 12Z run, and I'm showing you that 850 millibar part of the atmosphere that I was telling you about, that vorticity. If it looks decent and has the signature that we look for at that level, almost to the surface, 5,000 feet, then everything above it, usually, if it looks good there, everything else is usually intact. All right? So here are our players. This is the remnants of Fred, and you can see it looks like a little wave in there. It's a little bump on the isobars instead of a closed rotary circulation. So it's not dead. There's energy there. It's just not closed off. So let's put this into motion, and let's go out 24 hours, shall we? 24 hours. So tomorrow morning, there's the remnants of Fred trying to come back, taking that energy that's discombobulated over Cuba, consolidating it again, and the GFS suggesting that the northeast corner of that overall envelope of energy gets energized. We'll see about that. Big fat ridge of high pressure keeping it hot and steamy over the southeast, and this is also a block. The Fred can't just go into that, so it's got to go around it, and that track takes it up towards Alabama, at least according to the latest forecast from the Hurricane Center. Then let's look at Grace. Much more impressive in the vorticity field than is Fred 24 hours out, and this is passing just south of the islands, at least the core of it, if you will, just south of the U.S. British Virgin Islands, headed towards Puerto Rico, and that's exactly what it does, right over the spine of Puerto Rico, through tomorrow evening into early Monday morning. Fred closes in Monday on, at least the GFS showing the Panhandle, somewhere near or east of Pensacola, Destin, somewhere around there, while Grace is over eastern Hispaniola. But then, as Fred moves inland, Grace pops off of the northern coast of Haiti to the border area of Dominican Republic and Haiti into southern Bahamas, and now we're out at about 102 to day 5, 120 hours, right off the coast of Florida, finally making landfall across the Keys, and then into the Gulf of Mexico from there. Yes, we have to watch this very closely. And I know, like, you say, well, that's pretty far out in time. Things have been struggling. The modeling has just been abysmal, really. The genesis of these systems, picking up on their development. Remember, the Euro hardly saw Elsa at all until it was there. We can go on and on and on about that. But the models have been back and forth. You know, we're not really sure what's going on with that. If it's the background state, if it's the modeling itself, maybe still a lack of data from airplane. I don't know. Something's weird. But when you see a small, and that's a relatively small, but very intense looking cyclone in the model field, and that's only about a week out or so, 162 hours out. That's not 10 days. That's not 14 days. That definitely has my attention. That the potential for Grace to strengthen as it heads towards Florida, if it misses those islands down there, and Fred is a big clue here and a big key to this. If Fred stays weak, relatively, going into Florida or Alabama or whatever towards landfall, then its influence with the ridge building over the top of Fred won't have downstream shear for Grace. So the weaker Fred is, the stronger Grace could become. That makes meteorological sense. But one more caveat here. Since Grace is already pretty small and Fred is really not that well organized, they may not influence each other at all. Usually it's the first system that influences the trailing system. I know it's confusing. When you have two of them out there like that, they do interact with each other, even though they're more than 1,000 miles apart. So an interesting and somewhat concerning forecast period coming up. Let's just rewind this real quick, take a look at the whole loop again from the time that the GFS was initialized to the next 5 days or so. You see Fred come in there. Moderate tropical storm somewhere in the Panhandle, we'll see. And then Grace, that's a real big unknown there by day 5, sitting just to the east of the Florida Straits there, coming out of the Bahamas. We have seen some very strong hurricanes come from that angle, especially when they are small. So this will either be another tropical wave that just didn't turn out to be anything, or the GFS is on to something here that we really have to take note of. And considering the time of year and the warm water temperatures, I would be paying attention if I were you, very closely. All right, couple things here. This is a tweet from our good friend Brent. I almost called him Ben. We have a good friend named Ben, too, down in the Virgin Islands, and he's one of our Patreon supporters, and he was citing the HurricaneTrack interactive map Lots of cool things you can do with that. How do you get to that? Well, it's through our HurricaneTrack Insider site. This is the map link. This is the home page of our Insider site. These are some of our supporters through here, chatting away. This is what that map looks like. I showed it to you earlier. And these are the cameras that he was referring to. And we can zoom in and drill down. This is San Juan, Puerto Rico. We'll be watching this very closely tomorrow for sure. And we scoot over to the east a little bit towards the Virgin Islands. This is St. John at Brent's place. It takes a few seconds sometimes for the Nest Cam to populate. Nice low clouds there. But this is what we do. This is what Brent was talking about. You can track the hurricanes, the storms, keep an eye on the weather. This is Tim over in St. Thomas, Timothy Olive. And he's hoping to add another camera. He's got a few extras. But this is what we do. This is how we do it through Patreon. And that's how you can access it. That's the site that we use and app. Patreon is a website and an app that creators use, like me, musicians, filmmakers, bloggers, poets, you name it, and even weather people. And it's a crowdfunding site, but it's not like Kickstarter or a subscription service where you just hand over the money and that's it. This is a way where we work together. We build these things together, and that's exactly what we've done there. And that's what Brent was talking about in that tweet. So you go to patreon.com or get the app, the Patreon app, search HurricaneTrack, and it's easiest. And the link will be in today's description, as it always is. But that's how you access all of that cool stuff, and that's how we fund this big project. We got a lot of people working behind the scenes to make it happen, and Brent and Tim down there, Carlos, they're all part of that. A nice network of over 630 people on Patreon and about 100 others through the old HurricaneTrack Insider site, going back almost 16 years ago when we began this in 2005. It's come a long way, and it looks like we're getting ready to really put it to use. All right, that is it from me for today. Have a great rest of your Saturday. I'll be back tomorrow. Also, in the early morning, I do a audio podcast called Hurricane Season, the podcast, to kind of get the day started, what I'm looking at for the day ahead. And then I follow that up with a hurricane outlook and discussion video like you just watched. All right? Have a great rest of your afternoon. I'm Mark Sutta. Thanks for watching. We'll tackle it again some more tomorrow.